And if they don't come up because they see large numbers, then we could go ahead and from that height get into a steep dive and bomb the hell out of the runways and operating surfaces and ground them that way.
Just on two, clear takeoff, left hand. Takeoff left, left left, slim west, copy. Crossing 24. Crossing 24 is runway 28, ready for departure. Let's get 24 over here, takeoff.
Hello and welcome to the Blueskies podcast. I'm PR Ganapathy, your host. Well, folks, this week it's my great pleasure to host Air Marshal Harish Masand. Air Marshal Masand was commissioned into the fighter stream in 1967, flew numerous aircraft, including the Hunter during the 1971 war when he was posted in 37 Squadron. He shot down a Sabre, for which and other acts of bravery he was awarded the Veer Chakra. He later went on to fly MiG-21 and raised India's first MiG-29 Squadron, 28 Squadron, the famous first supersonics. Air Marshal Masand was, at that time, used to do an amazing demonstration of the MiG-29, including an awesome tail slide. And I remember watching on an Air Force day with an open mouth as he put the aircraft through his paces. He's truly a fighter pilot's pilot. Air Marshal Masand retired as an Air Marshal in 2006 and now lives in central India. We are truly fortunate to have him with us today. Thank you and welcome to the program, Air Marshal Masand.
Thank you, Gans. Pleasure being with you.
Let's back up a little bit and give us a flavor for where you grew up and what were your motivations to join the Air Force in those early days?
All right. So, Gans, I actually, our family, we migrated from Quetta, Balochistan, and Dad settled down in Indore, where he found some work to do as an engineer. So I grew up in Indore, in a small town in Madhya Pradesh that time. And as it happened, I was doing well in school, academically, coming first. And so Dad always thought that I'll become an engineer like him and grow his business. And he didn't want me to join the Air Force. Me, on the other hand, always visualized myself 10, 15, 20 years from then as a nerd with thick glasses and, only good in books and academics and good for nothing else. So I wanted to do something more adventurous, and things like, I joined the NCC Air Wing and went outdoors and did whatever I could, trying to do some more of the outdoor activity. But my elder brother was already in the Air Force by 1962, and my younger brother was in Riva, in Scenic School, on his way to NDA. So my dad just didn't want me to go into the armed forces. One of his sons was doing well in engineering in the college that I was in by 63, to stay back and help him in the family business or do something more and, become pretty rich. So I tried twice and he tore off my applications for the armed forces, the Air Force, the naval aviation ad that had come out. But finally, third time, we fudged his signature and
oh my goodness.
One of my friends did that, and I got a call letter for the Air Force selection board in Dehradun that time, direct entry, since I was already NCC Air Wing. And so he looked at me very quizzically and said, "Why are you doing this?" And I said, "Well, let me at least give it a shot and see whether I'm fit. For all you know, they'll reject me, looking at my physique." And so anyway, I went across, got selected, and joined the Air Force. You won't believe it, Dad didn't visit me for 20 years after that. He was so upset with me.
20 years, my goodness.
I would come home on leave, but he just didn't come over to me because he was so upset. He used to tell me before I left, and he tried, and he said, I pay my PMs and my subordinates more than the Air Force will ever pay you, and you're wasting your life and whatever. And I said, no, I just want to fly and get along. Did something. So, wow.
Right.
And that's how I started off in the Air Force. And luckily, I became a fighter pilot, did well initially in my course. And then I got posted to this squadron that we were talking about, 37 Squadron Hasimara on Hunters.
So you did your basic training in HT2s, Harvards, and the Vampire, your jet training in the Vampire?
PT, Allahabad for HT2s. Since I was NCC having, they sent me directly uh, to this establishment for flying instead of going through the administrative college in Coimbatore and the AFTUs that time, the other people were going. So I joined my course after the direct entry people and we had already done a year of training. And well, that was another story because when I joined, I mean, there were 4 of us from the NCC and 4 ex-airmen who joined directly. And there were like at least 150 direct and another 50, 60 NDA people or more. And 8 of us were picked on every day, literally, because we were outsiders or new. And we got hammered
Oh
pretty,
my.
pretty badly, most of the time. It toughened me up, made me learn. So I did Allahabad, HT2, and then Harvard's in Jodhpur, and then my empires in Hakimpet, Hyderabad. And finally got commissioned in December 67, as you just mentioned.
And you came straight to 37 Squadron, straight out of Hakimpet?
No, that's another story because we were the last of the bulge. After the 62, we were the last course. I mean, we passed out some 182 pilots and navigators in our course from the original 250 or 70 that started. There's a lot of rejection.
My goodness.
We were huge. And so we were sent off to a Vampire Squadron for 6 months where we just did 20 hours on Vampires in Pune, 220 Squadron, I remember. And then we went on to OTU and Hunters in Jamnagar, where we were supposed to do 50 hours on Hunters in 6 months. But because the numbers were piling up behind us and ahead of us, so they gave us some 11, 12 hours and shoved us out of OTU in Jamnagar also and sent us to operational squadron. So I landed up in 37 Squadron in Hasimara. And you won't believe it, guns, at one time we reached, just after I landed up in 68 December over there, our squadron reached 52 pilots.
52 pilots, my goodness. And how many aircraft did you have?
Well, it was standard 16 fighters and 2 trainers.
Oh my.
The establishment for the squadron was 20 pilots in peacetime. In wartime, you got beefed up a little bit. So I was 35th in the seniority list when I landed up in the squadron.
Oh my goodness.
So there was no chance of flying for many, many months. And, and I was, what I started doing was my engineering correspondence course again, because I'd already done almost 3 years of engineering. And I thought, the best way of utilizing my time on the ground in Hasimara would be to continue with my engineering. So I joined BIET and I was doing this course.
Oh, wow.
And 6 months later, I got fed up, because no flying, the first 20, 25 guys flew and the rest of us was hanging around in the squadron in the crew room. And you won't believe it, we used to play bingo or tambola for beer in the crew room. And, things like that used to happen, and crazy, absolutely. I finally put in my resignation and went to the store, very politely, of course. And I said, listen, I joined the Air Force because I thought you needed fighter pilots, but you obviously don't because you have more than enough surplus. So why don't you let me go? I haven't lost very much. I mean, I've done 2 years and I've just done about 200 hours of flying, 200 whatever training. And I'm quite happy. I've touched a fighter and, now I've got the hang of it. So let me go back and do my engineering without any rancor or any complaints. Now, I topped the course, so obviously the CEO was very upset. And Rusty Sinha, I remember, Wing Commander MM Sinha. And he didn't want me to go away like that because that would be, I think, bad for the Air Force or whatever. So he said, no. you can't do that, we'll fly you somehow. And well, he said, come back in 45 days, go home on leave and then come back, and then I'll fly you by then. So I went across, came to Indore and came back. And again, there was no flying for about 15, 20 days. I was sitting on the ground. And so I went to him again with another application, very politely. He said, sir, with my folded hands, let me go. I can understand your problem. You don't have the aircraft. You don't have space for me. So he told the flight commander, I still remember, Harish Singhal was the squad leader. Harish Singhal was the flight commander, and he used to be called Bhaiji. His pet name was Bhaiji. So he said, Bhaiji, fly your namesake, Harish, from tomorrow. So Bhaiji looks at Rusty Sinha and says, but sir, we don't have a trainer, and he hasn't flown for some 7-8 months now on the ground. So we can't even give him a dual check. So Rusty looked at me and said,
Wow.
You think you can fly solo? I said, sure, sir. Not a problem. I was pretty confident. I mean, I'd done well in flying, so I was pretty confident, and I was keeping up with my checks and procedures. So the next year I was launched solo after this 8 odd months in the ground with just a chase pilot. I still remember his name, Flight Lieutenant Konde, whom we later lost in 71 war. And that's how I started flying a little bit, but even then flying was not much. And by 1971, December, when we got into the ops, I had just barely 240 hours on the Hunter at that time. I mean, in 4 years of service, literally, I had 240 hours of fighter flying.
Oh my goodness, that is just amazing.
But I'll say one thing, Guns, over here. Because there were so many pilots, everybody they sent up, literally the senior flight lieutenants, I still remember some of the tough ones, Dave DeBra and S.K. Gupta, flight lieutenants, who were very exacting, very demanding. They were good flyers themselves. They had 700-800 hours on type, and they knew the aircraft backwards. But you made one mistake or you didn't perform, and because they had so many surplus pilots in the squadron, the guy was on his way to traffic controller course or some ground duty somewhere or attached somewhere, and he was out of flying, absolutely, quickly.
Wow.
So either you performed or you perished. And that's how I went through these guys, Dave DeVra particularly. And I mean, I won't go into the details because it'll take too long. But the way they trained us was like, right from the beginning, very demanding, no quarters given. So we shall I say, we were hardened up, and every minute in the air actually gave us some skill levels or, brought us up. And so 240 hours sounds very little. But in many ways, I think we had been trained very well, at least those guys who came up at that time, the young guys.
Amazing. And by the time the ops rolled around, had you completed your operational syllabus?
Just about in 1970, October, somehow or the other. There was no night syllabus in Hunters those days, so just day syllabus. I had completed and become day ops. And then they made me a trainer captain because by then, all the senior flight lieutenants were leaving the squadron. Dave DeBra had resigned and quit, and S.K. Gupta was posted somewhere else. So literally, I mean, at one time after 1970, when I became day ops as a young flying officer, there was squad leader Mascarenhas and Samantha, 2 squad leaders in the squadron. And literally, there was one flight lieutenant, S.K. Janaya, but I was the adjutant and I was also the deputy flight commander. And I used to run the flights, because Masca used to trust me and say, go and do it.
Wow.
So, I mean, at that time, I had the luxury of flying a lot. But, I realized that there were younger people who needed flying more than me. So I would not take any sorties and grab sorties. I gave it to them and only went for the important ones where I thought I had something to learn or something to contribute. So that's another reason why I didn't get too many hours on the aircraft. But good enough, yeah. So.
Wow, fantastic.
Just need 70, like your report time is southeast, Greenwich, for some advice, and you'll select it.
So take us to early 71, Jan, Feb. And when did Commander Call take over, and what was the mood like in Jan, Feb? And when did you begin to get a sense that you're likely to be seeing action sometime soon?
Well, March, if you remember, March 71 is where the 26th March, if I remember, was the genocide that started in Bangladesh. And we used to hear about it. Those days, there were no papers in Hasimara, to be honest. I mean, all the papers were 3 days old or whatever. And DAC, one of the Dakotas of Jame, used to bring it. But we used to listen to news on BBC and CNN, Voice of America. And by end of March, things were becoming bad. Supi Call took over on the 1st of April, which was Fool's Day and the Air Force Day those days.
Right.
In 71. And he was the fourth CEO that I'd seen, Rusty Sinha, and PJ, Jackie Jakadar, and then in between, when Jakadar lost his ears because one day with cold he flew. Then Squadron Bose, A. Bose, Bozo, as we used to call him, took over for some time, briefly as officiating, and then Sopi came and took over on 1st of April. By then, slowly in April, we started seeing the refugees, and there were some refugee camps next to Hashimara and Jaldapara area, that forest area that was set up. And we did go across once or twice just to see what this was all about, and saw people there in bad shape, and heard some horrendous stories, about rape and loot and murder and things like that, all these people.
My goodness.
We used to take a little bit of food, some of us guys went there, we take a little bit of food that we had, and just visit them and hear their stories. Though we couldn't understand them very well because they're all Bengali, but our guy would interpret and translate as to what they were saying. So by about May, I think command headquarters now put us on readiness for operations at any time. And hunters were basically in the strike role there. So we had 4 aircraft armed and ready and on standby 15 minutes. For air defense duties, you have the 2 aircraft on ORP, that operational readiness platform, at 5 minutes readiness or 2 minutes from the cockpit. We guys were in the dispersal with 15 minutes readiness. So most of us would sleep in the crew room during the day. Morning and afternoon shift, and we would hang around. So from about mid-May, if I remember correctly, we were on standby like this. And that, because 4 aircraft were locked up there, 2 aircraft were locked up in ORP, the flying reduced even more, actually, because we had 6 aircraft already tied up, out of the 10 or 12 that were serviceable.
Right.
But yeah, so that's how we got into it.
And what sort of armament did the hunter carry at that time? Was it bombs and rockets, guns?
Bombs, rockets, and guns, all of them. So the hunter, we were flying the Mark 56 or Mark 6, as the British called it, which was capable of carrying 4 drop tanks. It had 4 stations. So if you carried the 400-gallon drop tanks, you couldn't carry any rockets or bombs because you could only carry the 4 inbuilt 30mm Aiden guns that we had. So so you could carry 2 tanks and 2 bombs, or 2 tanks and some rockets and then guns. So this is what we carried. And as it happened, some of our aircraft, but Supi was earlier qualified in photo recce in 101 Squadron in Vampires in Tezpur days or whatever. So command chose, I think 6 of our aircraft were modified for the fighter reconnaissance FR role with 3 cameras starting about June, July. And we had the 2 Winton cameras, F95s, 95mm focal length on the side-looking camera, left and right, and 135 zoom lens camera in the nose. And Supi started training some of us into the photo recce role, or the fighter reconnaissance role, from about August. And then I think starting October, command gave us some tasks, and I did Um, uh, I did some 9 photo recce or FR missions with what we call inside Bangladesh or East Pakistan that time before the war started. Now, I was the adjutant of the squadron when Supi took over already. Um, and how I got to be his permanent, almost his permanent number 2 is another very funny story, actually, which I can talk about some of the time.
No, I'd really love to hear that story because, from at least the history, it appears that you were there with him in almost every critical sortie that he flew.
Well, Supi, I was the adjutant, but I also had, shall I say, my own ways. I was kind of not the yes man. I was a little rebellious. Supi used to call me the angry young man, and um, long hair. Typical East Air Force. And things like that. So, uh, Supi actually took in I think August, September. He chose a guy called Suresh Malan, who was one course junior to me, but also sword of honor and number 1 in his course, and good guy, very nice guy, as his permanent number 2. So I was quite happy because I was flying with anybody. It didn't matter really to me. Never thought of it. Around October, I think Malan took a bike ride to see his girlfriend in the blackout period or whatever, and met with an accident and broke both his legs.
Oh my goodness.
He was in Lucknow hospital and moved there. And he moved on to helicopters after that because he never flew flighters again. Then Supi fell back on me because I was the next guy or whatever. And he had to suffer me.
Right.
As luck would have it, I think we did well together. His wife, Mrs. Call, was very, very, shall I say, very fond of me over time. Became very fond of me, and both the daughters. And I started actually, whenever I went home to them, both these girls, Shivyani and Divyani, Shivi and Devi, they were like 5, 6 years old, the elder one, and 4 years old, the other one, something like that. And both would compete and sit on my lap, together. So one on the right thigh and one on the left thigh. So I told Mrs. Call before the war, I think, I'll have to marry both the girls at this rate. So I started calling her mother-in-law Mill for short. So I always address her as Mill, just like your mom, Amma, was known in the Air Force by that name. Mrs. Call was known as Mill for most of us, at least me. And later, after the war, as the war progressed, and I shot on that saber behind Supi and got him alive, and he came back from every sortie, literally without a scratch. I think Mill actually used to say it openly in front of him. This guy, this boy, saved your life, Supi, you owe it to him.
It's your lucky charm.
Yeah, so whatever. So, I mean, I was very fond of her. She was a lovely person, and it's amazing how I met her and got to know her also. And you won't believe it. Do you have a little time? Can I digress a little bit from war?
Please, of course, this program is all about digression.
On 1st of April, when they took over, like I said, he was the 4th SEAL. And we had seen enough SEALs now, kind of, we were kind of, couldn't care less about new SEALs because we knew we'll just carry on. So Maskey came running to me. We were standing in the bar, most of us youngsters. We hardly said hello to them, the new CEO and his wife. And Maskey, the flight commander, came and said, Kape, but that was my pet name in the squadron. Kape, you're the adjutant, you haven't gone and, seen Mrs. Call and wished her and, you haven't talked to her, and bad, go across. So I told him, I said, sir, we'll go there and she'll ask us, where the vegetable shops are or wherever, those kind of domestic issues. And we know nothing about it as bachelors. So they said, no. So he kind of dragged me there. And I went across and said, good evening, Mrs. Call. And promptly, can I get you a drink? Because we thought, at the moment she says, get a drink, I'll run to the bar and, kind of send her a drink, but disappear. Well, and she just looked at me sweetly and said, I was waiting for someone to ask me, could you get me a gin and lime? So you won't believe it. I think I stood third, and we had 4 drinks or 5 drinks together after that. We kept chatting about various things. So she was very, very, very nice person, very lively and full of life and very easy to get along with. And that's how I got to know her. And then we became, I think, very close in a way. I'm very sorry to see her go a few years ago, unfortunately. But she was a lovely person. So literally family.
Right.
So that's how we came close to the war and the era at that time.
Visual to Fort Ridgeway. Just need 70, like your report IP southeast, connection for the midway, and you will select it.
We can come back to fighter reconnaissance or photo reconnaissance. What does that involve for our audience who are not familiar with the term?
Yeah. So, you went on these photo modified aircraft with these cameras could bring back films, though for a limited area on either side of the aircraft and in front. But covered with 2 aircraft flying broad front about 2,000 yards away, it did cover about, shall I say, 3-4 miles wide area, and we went across. So we did these 9 different missions, and inside, looking for various things wherever the command sent us. But I want to bring out, since you're talking about fighter reconnaissance at this stage, that out of these 9 missions, only 3 were asked for by the Army. One was in Hilli sometime in November, another one in Dinajpur, and the third one was in Comilla and Lalmai Hills. As late as 2nd of December, actually, just 2 days before the war started. So I would say that one of the lessons I drew from this is that we didn't utilize these camera and fighter reconnaissance assets adequately in the war to collect enough intelligence. For example, even for the Air Force, when we went in for the attack against Dhaka on the airfields, we didn't have photographs of the airfield. We didn't know exactly what the layout of the airfield was, where the aircraft were likely to be parked or hidden in various dispersals or hard standings or blast pans or where the key installations of the airfield were. And we had to just go blind. I mean, literally, here's Dhaka airfield on the map, and we went across in Tesgaon and then pulled up and looked for targets on the ground. So that was one of the reasons why I'd actually, Sup used to call me an angry young man again, because in May, June, when we started standing by at 15 minutes, I raised this issue with him in the crew room and said, we were guns, we were loaded up with 4 tanks, 100-gallon tanks, and four guns internal, 135 millimeter cannon shells in each Aiden gun. 135 shells, 135 into 4. And our calculated radius of action with some combat fuel and diversion for the Mark 56 that we were flying were 167 nautical miles, I still remember. And Tesgaon was 181 nautical miles. So we were going out 2 minutes low, extra on the way out, and 2 minutes coming back. That ate up into our combat reserve completely, and a bit of the diversion fuel also. So I actually asked Supi this question very innocuously. I was a young guy, I remember. So I'd asked him, I said, sir, we're going across so far with just guns. Do you expect the Pakistanis to line up the sabers outside on the dispersal for us to pick on them? I mean, we've dispersed our hunters all over after 65 lesson. 65, we lost a lot of aircraft on the ground. And now in 71, in Hasimara, even our aircraft were dispersed in various hard standings in the jungle. And you won't believe it, guns, it was so great in Hasimara. The foliage and the jungle was so thick that, you could drive by in a Jeep and sometimes not see the opening to the hard standing.
Wow, my goodness.
I remember when we were young and watching around, MiGs used to come and attack from simulated attacks on Hasimara. They would pull up exactly over Tursa Bridge, which was the pull-up point, but 3-4 kilometers west of the runway. But as they pulled up, they couldn't see the runway because the runway was painted light blue as a river. So we used to call Hasimara the only river flowing east to west.
My goodness.
The rest of the rivers used to flow north and south. So this was the only three odd kilometer long riverine. So people couldn't see it unless you knew Hasimara and you flew around. You couldn't spot it. So I expected the same on the other side of the border, with Pakistan and Tezgao and similar, that they would also disperse their aircraft and we won't find anything on the ground. So I asked him, I said, if we pull up and we don't find the aircraft, don't look around, don't see them, what are we going to do? Pepper the runway with 30mm guns? Is that going to be enough? So I had actually argued at that time and said, why don't we go medium level, high level with 2 tanks and 2 bombs and guns, of course, on board, inside. And that way we go across and we have, large numbers. There were some 9-10 squadrons in the east against one single squadron of sabers in Dhaka. And I said, with all these squadrons, we can go across in numbers and at high level, medium level, where we'll have adequate fuel reserves. And if they come and meet us in the air, so we'll dump our bombs and fight them, in the air and shoot them down in the air with numbers on our side.
Yep.
And if they don't come up because they see large numbers, then we could go ahead and from that height get into a steep dive and bomb the hell out of the runways and operating surfaces and ground them that way. That way, I also said that we would save aircraft from, exposure to small arms and anti-aircraft fire. And because I followed the steep attacks wherever I went, and Supi also there with me, you wouldn't believe it. I mean, a lot of people were lost and because of ACAC and small arms fire, they came back wounded or aircraft damaged. Both of us, I think, came back without a bullet hole in the entire war. Not a scratch in our aircraft completely.
Right.
So I was told, I was a young flying officer, so I made this point, but I was told to kind of keep my mouth shut because command has dictated whatever they dictated. Whoever was sitting in command obviously didn't want to be questioned on this. And I don't think Sophie put it up. I'm not certain. And this was just within the squadron. So anyway, we flew like that. This is kind of
Why do you think the army didn't exploit this reconnaissance feature enough? Did they, it almost sounds like y'all were fighting 2 separate wars by yourselves.
No, you won't believe it. I mean, even the Air Force didn't utilize it because the Su-7 that I flew later after the war, and there was a squadron of Su-7s, I think 221 squadron, which was positioned in the east in Panagarh. The Su-7 comes with an inbuilt vertical camera.
Right.
And I used to do that, a lot of photo recce or FR on the Su-7. Ideal from about 3 kilometers, at high speed at 1.1 Mach, you run in and you take pictures of the entire area and you could piece together literally a good mosaic for a photo interpreter, quite frankly. But even the Su-7s, I don't think they were utilized adequately or enough. Not even, forget the army, not even by the Air Force. Because like I said, even for Air Force targets, we didn't have enough intelligence.
Intelligence, yeah.
We didn't have photographs of Tezgao and Kurmitola airfield. We didn't have photographs of Dhaka city itself, which I will talk about later, governor's house and university area and other things. So with the result that, people had to go there blind, pull up based on the known location, look around. And obviously, while you're looking around, and pulling up and you're hesitating, you don't know exactly where the targets are. The ACAC was so thick over Dhaka, really, that, the unlucky ones got picked up by the ACAC. And we, on the 4th itself, I remember we lost 2 aircraft to ACAC in Dhaka. Squad leader Samantha, the senior flight commander himself, and Flight Lieutenant S.G. Konde that I talked about, who had gone to FIS and come back attached to the squadron again to fight the war. So we lost both of them.
Right.
Samantha, there's a controversy because the Pakistanis later in a book claimed that he was shot down by a saber, but his number 2 was with him, Flight Lieutenant Nair, SKJ Nair, claimed that he didn't see any sabers and Samantha was hit by ACAC. So we don't know exactly who hit him, but we lost, whatever what the reason was.
Right.
So intelligence saw. So you talked about not utilizing within the Air Force, we didn't utilize, and within the Army, of course, there were these which I didn't realize at that time because we were very friendly with the Army at our level, and everybody talked and we partied together and kind of drank together. But I think it's somewhere down at the high level there was very little coordination, joint planning. I don't think the Army even understood the shall I say the importance and the way of utilizing air power to their in aiding their objective, quite frankly. So there were these silos working, and nobody wanted to share with each other, which is sad because like I'll give you this example of the last one that I mentioned, Hilli and Dinajpur. Of course, we did in October, November. But Comilla we did on 2nd of December. And that's when I heard, there I heard of a great Army general, let's be honest. That's one way I put it. We did this FR mission on second morning from Guwahati. I remember Supi had gone to command on the first for some briefing. And I got a call late at night saying, Kapil, bring 2 aircraft, FR roll 4 tankers to Guwahati tomorrow morning, first flight, as soon as you can. So I took one youngster and we landed up in Guwahati. And there I found the CNC, Air Marshal Diwan and Supi and Station Commander and everybody standing over my head and saying, and Supi, took me to the VIP, sort of the cottage and in that, and said, make these maps. We are going here now. He gave me the target of Comilla Lal. So I was making these maps and, the navigation manually and things like that. And CNC was standing over there and saying, hurry up, hurry up. And I had to finally tell him, I said, sir, let me make my maps in peace, because if you keep standing over my shoulder, I'll make a mistake somewhere, do something wrong. Leave me alone for a while, because it's a manual process. And, those days you had to draw the line and calculate and find the features and mark them. And, we had to make 2 sets for Supi and me. And you also had to take the target area from quarter-inch map and put it on the million map on which we navigated. And, then, so then we took off, shall I say, just forenoon sometime, or at around noon, we finished the task and landed up in Kumigram on 2nd. And thereafter, all these 6,000 prints, 3,000 prints in each aircraft, 1,000 for each camera on each, 3 cameras. These were developed in the photo section there in Kumigram. And Supi and I remember sat till almost 2 in the morning in turns, going to the photo section and marking these 6,000 prints with China graph, because there was no photo interpreter, and we had to find what the Army was looking for, like bunkers and fortifications and gun positions or whatever we saw.
My goodness.
With our naked eyes. So we sat up till 2 o'clock, like that. And I remember in this 2 o'clock thing, there was a great friend of mine, helicopter pilot, Rupinder Singh, Rupi, who presented us with a bottle of scotch and said, you guys need to, keep your things right. So Supi and I were taking swigs on this, and having a drink and carrying on and working till 2. And the next morning, on 3rd morning, I remember we put all these into a helicopter which flew off to 4 Corps headquarters in Teliamura, some place which I had never heard of, very close somewhere, and delivered these prints. Now, much later, and that's when I heard of General Sagat Singh, because these helicopter boys who were there in Kumigram, particularly Rupi, etc., told us, because we asked them what's going on and who the commanders are. And they were full of praise for this guy, Sagat. And they said he's a wonderful commander, very flamboyant, and he talks to us and he flies with us regularly. And I believe he was a paratrooper, which I read about later, of course. So he knew the Air Force and had worked with the Air Force well. And this guy was amazing, because though he asked for this recce too late, and by then 4 Corps had already started operations, so I don't think they utilized the photographs we gave them enough or in time. But as soon as we achieved air superiority, this guy used those few helicopters, Mi-4s, old Mi-4s that he had, and a few Alouettes, and jumped across and bypassed the enemy through this indirect approach and put his troops all over,
Right.
including the gates of Dhaka. Brilliant command.
Brilliant, absolutely.
None of the other corps did it, but he did it. He was just waiting. So intelligence-wise, frankly, we didn't utilize the assets adequately, in my opinion. We could have done much more. We had no problems. And okay, if they were worried about the hunters going in doing FR over Dhaka, because we could have been bounced by sabers and it would have become difficult. We could have certainly done the Sioux, at 1.1 mark, just flown across and nobody could have caught the Sioux. With these photographs, we could have had adequate intelligence, at least just before the hostilities started. Okay, you didn't want to intrude and internationally you don't want to go in earlier. But I would say a week before, after 22nd of November, when the Boira encounter took place and things like that, well, no one can stop you from doing reconnaissance.
Were there PR Canberras at that time? Because Canberra could go at an altitude nobody could reach it at, right?
Canberra was vulnerable, remember? Far more vulnerable than the hunter.
Right.
Going in. So I wouldn't have recommended Canberra, but certainly the Sioux-7 could have done it.
Right.
At least close to the wall. Or at least on the first day, I would say. And those prints should have been, after the first sortie or something, could have gone in the war. War started. And those prints then could have been distributed very rapidly to all the squadrons so that, anyone who was going to Dhaka had some photographs for subsequent sorties at least.
Well, sir, we've almost been speaking for about 40 minutes now. And I think we'll take a break here and pick up the threads again next week on your actual experiences during the war. Thank you very much for all your time today.
Thank you, Gans. Pleasure being with you.
Well, folks, that's all we have time for today. I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Air Marshal Masand. There are a few things that came up in the conversation that I just want to clarify. The first is he spoke about being one of the last batches in the bulge. And this refers to a significant expansion in hiring into the armed forces that happened following the 1962 war. As we expanded, because we suddenly realized that we actually had neighbors who were more belligerent and a neighborhood that was more dangerous than earlier assumed. And so that caused a significant increase in the number of officers and pilots and obviously put a pressure on the system, as you saw firsthand. And as a result, we were sending in pilots into the war with much less experience than they should have had at that point. The second thing is the wonderful family feeling that he speaks about in the squadron, and I've experienced this firsthand. The girl sitting on his lap and how friendly he was with the commanding officer's wife. This happened to me. I still remember some of those pilot officers who were under my father's command in Tezpur back in the 70s, and they still remain some of the dearest friends of our family 50 years later. The last thing is, and this is going to come up again in the second part of our conversation with Air Marshal Masand, is about the planning and coordination between the various armed forces to utilize the assets that we have, such as the photo reconnaissance and the planning that might allow. So stay tuned for more on that particular subject because the conversation takes a really interesting turn in the second half. In the meantime, sign up for updates at blueskiespodcast.com. There you'll find links to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You can also write to us with your comments, questions, suggestions, and feedback from the website or to blueskies@prganapati.com. Subscribe to the podcast on any podcasting platform such as Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and even on YouTube. If you like what you heard, share it with your friends, give us a rating in your favorite podcasting app, and write us a review. It will help other people find us. I want to give my thanks to Saurav Chordia for our logo and Prithvik for the music. I want to reiterate that all the views expressed here are personal, and this podcast has not been approved by or reviewed by the Air Force, Ministry of Defense, or any branch of the government. In the meantime, stay safe and Jai Hind.